sort of thing. I see we've got some other people from Kiev, from Kharkiv. I love Kharkiv. It's one of my favorite cities in Ukraine, actually. Oh my goodness, let's see. I can't read fast enough. Rivne, I've been to Rivne. Rivne's a very nice town, and Ternopil. So nice for you guys to join us today for our webinar here at Internal Education. I would love to know too, where you guys are teaching. Do you teach at state schools? Do you teach with private language institutions? I'm a senior teacher at London School of English, which is the sister company of Internal Education. And we are a private language center, so we work with kids, with teens, adults. We work with the kids after school. We also do corporate clients as well. So if you could just type in the comments, let's see, secondary schools, state schools. Yep, secondary. Any primary school teachers? I see some private school teachers as well, private language center. Okay, great. Like I said, I work with London School of English here in Kiev, but I've worked in different places all around the world, which I'm going to talk about a little bit today as well. Secondary and senior students, okay, all kinds of classes, higher education, that's very interesting. I would love to sort of learn a little bit more about higher education and English language teaching here in Ukraine. Let's see, lots of secondary, primary. Some of you do everything, wow. And how many of you guys are teaching online right now? Is everyone teaching online? You can type in the chat box. How are you enjoying online teaching? Is it fun? Is it challenging? Maybe it's a mix of both. Yeah, someone says so-so. It's a unique thing, right? For all of us to have to go online so quickly and so suddenly. So there are certain challenges, but it's good to see that some of you like teaching online. Yeah, you know, sometimes we need these challenges to help us grow a little bit. Otherwise, we wouldn't take on these sort of unique professional goals ourselves. I know I was not thinking about teaching online at all before quarantine, but now I'm doing my third internal webinar in addition to all of my online classes. So it does have its challenges, but we're very happy at Internal Education to be able to provide online webinars for you guys to keep professional development going and to sort of keep learning and developing together as teachers. So let's get started. So once again, my name is Amy Butler. Maybe some of you came to my webinar a couple weeks ago about primary school children and reflective learning in primary school. So, oh, yeah, hello. Thank you guys for coming again to my other webinar. This is going to be something totally different. So I hope you guys are interested and excited. So I work with London School of English as a senior teacher. I have been teaching English for about 7 years now, and I've taught in a variety of different contexts. I'm originally from New York City. I don't know if you can hear my American accent or not. So I'm from New York City, and when I decided to teach English, I actually started teaching in New York City for a while. It was a very sort of interesting classroom because we had students come from all over the world. So in my classroom, I could have, you know, housewives from Japan and businesswomen from Brazil and university students from Italy all in one classroom, and it was super, super interesting to be there. But after about 2 years, you know, I wanted to leave my hometown of New York, and I wanted to sort of travel around a bit. So in the last 5 years, I've taught in Ukraine, I've taught in Singapore, I've taught in Tbilisi, and I've taught in Moscow. And I've spent a little bit of time in Poland getting my Delta, so I have some experience teaching Polish students as well. And all these experiences have sort of informed the webinar that I'm going to give today. All of my teaching experiences, my Delta experiences. I'm a fully qualified Delta teacher, and I'm very excited to sort of share some ideas that I've been having over the last couple of years with you guys. So let's get started. Just a reminder, you guys will receive a certificate for attending this webinar. It will be in your email within like a week or two. So if you don't see it in your email, first check your spam box. And then if you still don't see it, you can send us an email to follow up and find out where your certificate is. So the title of today's webinar is Teaching Global Accents in the English Classroom. And I would really like first to get your impression, to get your ideas What do you think of when you hear this phrase? If you just type in the chat box, do you have any associations with any of these words? Some of these words are sort of hot topic words in English teaching. So when you read the title of this webinar, what ideas, what associations do you have? Okay, so I see someone said globalization. Yes, exactly. This has definitely come out of globalization. Variants, different variations and things, pronunciation and multilingual. Okay, great. I've got a lot of really good ideas coming from you guys. Diversity, exactly. We're going to be talking about diversity. Like I said, globalization is a huge thing. Like English has changed so much, even in the last 7 years that I've been teaching it. I've noticed my students' needs have changed because of globalization and global communication. So you guys are exactly on the right track about what I was thinking when I started working on this webinar for you guys. So in this webinar today, we're going to look a little bit about why we should teach global accents and what I mean by teaching global accents in a minute, because I mean something very specific. How we can teach them, so what sort of activities we can include in our lessons, ones that are sort of more subtle, ones that are sort of more obvious, helping students raise their awareness of different accents. And also where you can find the resources to do so. Because I know one of the challenges in this topic, and including more diverse accents into our lessons, is it's hard to find these resources, but they're really everywhere on the internet, and I'm going to show you guys later. So I do want to talk about what this webinar isn't, because when I talk about teaching global accents with people, a lot of times they think I'm talking about producing different accents. And this is absolutely not what I mean. You teach your students the pronunciation that you are going to teach them. I know a lot of English teachers have very high standards. A lot of students want to speak like, British RP, or they want to sound like Americans, but this is not at all what I'm talking about. The focus of this webinar is not that we're trying to teach our students to speak in a specific way. Their accent is their accent. This is all about listening. So this webinar is about teaching our students to be better listeners, to understand others better. Because I don't know about you guys, but a lot of the course books I've taught from in my career, they're all British and American. Actually, they're mostly British accents. If you have your listening text from your course book, a lot of it is sort of very proper British English. And that's just not what our students are going to be dealing with in the real world. They're going to be talking to lots of different people from all over the world, not just British and American speakers of English. So I know a lot of you said you guys work in state schools, and maybe you work in state schools that are sort of, not in Kiev, not in Odessa, not in Lviv. So maybe you're thinking, well, my students, they just need exposure to like British English or American English. But you have to think about where your students are going to be in 5 or 6 or 7 years. A lot of your students may go to university in Poland, for example, and speak to lots of different international people in Poland. A lot of your students are going to travel all over the world. I know that Asia is a very popular destination. I have some Ukrainian friends who are English teachers in like Thailand and Vietnam. So they'll be talking to people in that part of the world. And your students as well may grow up to do business internationally. So even if you work in a state school right now, or you think that my students don't really need to hear different accents, they don't need any diversity in their listening skills, you have to think like in the future, like you guys were saying, we're in a globalized world, and they're probably not going to be going just to the UK to speak English with British people. So I'm going to give you an example from a couple of students that I've had throughout my career. And they all had a shared learning goal. And I would like you to tell me what you think it is. Okay, so here are 3 students that I've had. Their names are different. I changed their names, but these are based on real people. So in Kiev a couple of years ago, I was teaching Ruslan in a small group. This was a corporate client I had. So there were 3 students, and they all worked in film and TV sales. So that's one student. Then I had another student when I was living in Singapore, Hannah. She was from Japan, and she had moved to Singapore with her husband for his work. So she was in a general English class with me and several other women who were mostly from Japan, Thailand, and Korea. And then when I was living in Tbilisi teaching English, I had a private student, one-to-one, Miriam, who was an eye surgeon in Tbilisi. So what do you guys think, if you could type into the chat box, what is a shared learning goal that all of these students had throughout the time I was teaching them? And I was teaching them at different points in the last 5 years, different contexts, different settings. They all had one shared learning goal in their English education, for example. Yeah, exactly. To communicate globally with different people, communication, and for different reasons too. Like some of you are saying business. Yeah, some of you are saying traveling. Yes, exactly. Ruslan had to travel and sell his film and TV shows to different people around the world. He frequently went to Asia, and not only like sell, he had to negotiate with his Chinese partners, with Japanese partners. It was a pretty challenging thing to do. You know, he wasn't going to America. Well, he was sometimes, but not always just to America, not always to Europe, but, you know, to Asia as well. Hana, she was living in Japan, or she was living in Singapore, sorry. She was Japanese, living in Singapore. And English is one of the official languages of Singapore, but Singapore is a huge expat hub. So she was talking to other moms, expat moms at the school from Thailand or Korea. She was having to talk to doctors who the Singapore accent is different than the American accent of English. So she had to sort of adjust her own understanding of different English accents as well. And then Miriam, the eye surgeon, she had never left the country before, but when I was teaching her, she got an invitation to go to a medical conference in India. And it was going to be about a week of seminars, of like medical sessions. She was going to go to hospitals and learn from doctors who are professionals in India. So she was going to be exposed to a totally different accent of English than she'd ever really heard before. So they're having to listen to really diverse accents, not just standard American like mine. I mean, mine is sort of standard American, but again, Americans have accents too, not just sort of your standard British accents, totally different accents. And it's all about listening and understanding, because communication it's two things, right? You have to be able to speak clearly, but also if you don't understand the other person, you're just going to get really, really confused, and you're going to feel really uncomfortable, and then you're not going to want to speak. So this is all about helping our students learn to listen better. When I was doing my Delta research, I came across this quote, and I thought it was really, really insightful and really sort of helped me think a lot about this topic, that English is now a common linguistic resource for communication for many more speakers than its native speakers. So let's see if you guys know how many people speak English, because it's a crazy number. If you type in the chat box, can you guess how many people around the world, native and non-native speakers alike, speak English? Because it's a pretty big number. And I think when you look at percentages, okay, you guys are pretty close. 3 billion is a little bit too high, but you're getting close. All right, billions, yeah, billion. Oh, okay, I see Oksana got it. I think it was 1.5 billion speakers of English around the world. But if you break it down to native speakers and non-native speakers, you'll see that native speakers are like the tiny small percentage. We're only 25% of this. And that includes people from, you know, from the UK, from Canada, from Australia. They have totally different accents than I do. The majority of people who speak English around the world are non-native speakers. So why do we neglect this in our classroom? Why aren't we teaching our learners about other sort of varieties of English they might hear? Why aren't we including it in our classroom? It's a really important topic, especially like you guys were saying, in the globalized world. This is 21st century, you know? Your students are gonna go all over the world, and they're not just gonna speak to this tiny 25% of the 1.5 billion speakers of English. They're much, much more likely to speak to other non-native speakers. So you may think that's not really a big deal, because maybe you're like, you know what, Polish speakers of English and Ukrainian speakers of English, they're pretty similar in their accents. My Ukrainian students will be able to, if they go to Poland, totally understand their Polish classmates, for example. But let's just think about it for a minute. And I would like you to think, who are the most difficult nationalities for you to understand? And I'm going to tell you who I really struggle to understand. And it might be surprising. But let's just brainstorm some ideas here. Who you guys struggle to understand, and maybe we can figure out why it is that it's difficult to understand speakers of English from these different countries. Okay, yeah, let's think about non-native speakers of English. I agree that the Irish people, they are hard to understand sometimes. Let's think about and Scottish people too, very hard to understand. But let's think about non-native speakers of, so I see a lot of people saying Chinese speakers of English and Indian speakers of English. Okay, yep. All right, Turkish speakers of English, and definitely there's lots of tourism between Turkey and Ukraine, so it's very likely that your students will talk to people from Turkey. So for me, 100% the most difficult people to understand are actually the French, which maybe is surprising because they're a European, country, and people think that in general, Europeans are very easy to understand when they speak English, but I really struggle to understand French people. And it wasn't until I learned why I struggled to understand French people that I got better at understanding them. So, do you guys have any guesses why French speakers of English are difficult to understand? Because there's something very, very specific about the French. All right, here, this is from Michael Swan and Bernard Smith's Learner English, which is an excellent book and a huge resource for any English teacher. Yes, it's the stress. I see someone said it in the chat box. The French and English systems of word stress and rhythm are very different, and this can lead to serious difficulties in both understanding and in producing spoken English. So the key here is word stress. Their word stress is totally different than ours. They always go up at the end. I can kind of recreate it, but I'm not going to because I sound silly as a French person. But this totally different stress, they carry it over from French to English, and it makes it very difficult sometimes to understand French speakers of English. Once you know that, it becomes a lot easier to understand them. A lot of you guys said Indian speakers of English were very difficult to understand. Do you guys know what it is about Indian speakers of English and their accents that make them difficult to understand? Because again, it's something that people often bring from their native languages over to English that causes this confusion. Let's see. Here's what Michael Swan and Bernard Smith have to say. This is one of the things. They're characteristic interrogative patterns in which the end of the question is marked by rise, fall in intonation is quite unlike the English norm and can easily cause misunderstanding. So here, it's a problem in intonation a lot of times. Ukrainian has a very specific intonation pattern. English has very specific intonation patterns, and so does the languages spoken in India. So if they bring that over to English, it can make them really difficult to understand. Some of you guys were also talking about Japanese speakers of English were difficult to understand. Any ideas on why Japanese English is sometimes difficult to understand? And here again, it's a very specific thing that when I was teaching back home in New York City, I had to work a lot with my Japanese students and their pronunciation because it was causing problems in students understanding them. Yes, exactly, Elena. Elena's got the right idea, the RL problem. Japanese has a rather limited phonemic inventory. So their sounds, they have way fewer sounds than English does, and in their distribution. So if they have a smaller number of sounds, it's going to cause confusion in communication, because people who are listening for the L sound or the R sound or whatever sound, and if the Japanese speaker of English isn't producing it, it's going to cause total confusion. So this is just a couple of reasons why it can be difficult to understand other speakers of English. we focus on these things when we're teaching pronunciation and when we're teaching listening as well in our classrooms. When we are teaching both pronunciation and listening, we are teaching our learners about stress patterns. We're teaching them how to sort of understand the difference between the word desert and dessert, okay? We teach them about intonation. We teach them when someone says something one way, you know, they're stressing one word or they're trying to communicate this. And we teach them about the sounds that American and British speakers of English produce. So we teach them all these things, but for a lot of us, we're teaching them in the way that American and British speakers of English produce them. And in the 21st century world, we sort of have to open up our minds a little bit more to think about, like, okay, so if we're teaching our students to understand these things, what other contexts might they be in the future where this will cause a problem and it will cause a breakdown? So that's why I think that we need to include some more diverse accents into our classrooms. It's, again, like I said, a very big thing in like the 21st century world. 10 years ago, this wasn't always like a focus because students were still like, I want to go travel in the US or I want to go study in the UK. But now you have students who are going to go study in Germany or who are going to go work in Saudi Arabia. I had a Ukrainian student who left to do an internship in Saudi Arabia. So we have to think about our students' needs a lot of the times, okay? So now we want to be practical. We've talked about why we should do it. Let's talk about how we can do it and how we can include more diverse accents in our classroom. But I'd like to know from you guys, if you could just sort of type in the chat box, what kind of accents do you include in your classrooms? Maybe it's the accents that are with your course book. So maybe it is a lot of British accents, a lot of American accents. Maybe you get some Australian accents, but just type in the chat box. What kind of accents do you include in your classrooms right now? So I see lots of British and American. Yep, British. Mostly British. I like someone says they love the American accent. My British coworkers and I like to argue all the time about which English is the best English. So yeah, a lot of British and American. I see someone said they include the Indian accent in their classroom, which is great. A lot of British. Okay, so yes, British English, it's important that the students be exposed to that, especially if they're going to be taking standardized tests. You know, if they're going to be taking any sort of tests, they have to be aware of the British accents. But in real life, when they're not talking to just British people, they need to be ready to understand others. So let's talk about how we can include more diverse accents, not just British, not just American, not native accents at all, but sort of accents from around the world. So my very first tip for this, because sometimes it can feel overwhelming to be like, I have to include like Japanese accents or, you know, Brazilian accents. Just keep it simple, okay? When you're teaching listening, all you have to do is include a sort of a non-British, non-American, non-native accent into your listening text. So that way, you're not really focusing on it so much. You're not teaching them about the accent. You're just sort of normalizing the fact that when they go into the real world, you know, they're not going to speak to British people. And a lot of materials already do this. So this is an example from SpeakOut Pre-Intermediate. Do any of you use SpeakOut in your classes now, or maybe you have in the past used SpeakOut? Yep, okay, good. I see some people saying yes. Yes, it's cool. I like SpeakOut too. We use it at London School of English. It's a Pearson product. So one of the things that they do that I like is they have these video lessons at the end of every unit, and it's authentic. It's a real BBC news clip. And they sort of go around the world, and it's BBC, so often the presenters are British, but they go around the world and they sort of interview different people, or they do sort of news segments on different things that are happening. So students are exposed to real, authentic English from around the world. And this is an example from Pre-Intermediate. This was an interview with a woman who started a shoe factory in Ethiopia. So this is a chance for pre-intermediate students. So again, they don't have to be a certain level to start listening to diverse accents. You can start with starter. You can start with elementary. Here's an example from pre-intermediate. They went to Ethiopia and they interviewed this woman, a local Ethiopian woman who started this shoe factory, and what it has meant to her community, how popular the shoes have gotten, and how they've gone all over the world. So this is a very sort of realistic, authentic, and easy thing for you to do as a teacher to sort of open up your students' awareness to other accents. Just look at what your materials offer you and see like what you can do. And again, you don't have to focus on the features of Ethiopian English. All you have to do is sort of a normal, typical listening lesson, and then, look at your students, see how they react, see if they need some sort of help or adjustment and understanding the different accents that they are exposed to. And again, authentic materials is such a great resource for diverse accents in listening texts. I'm going to give you an example that I've done with teenagers. This was kind of around Valentine's Day. I think we did this lesson. I found a video series called My First Love Letter. So this is always fun to do with teenagers, to see how they sort of react to the idea of love letters. So what I did was I first started with sort of a normal prediction activity for a listening lesson. So I put all these words up here. You can see most of them. You can see like paper, stupid, heartbreak, breakup, email, books. And I had my students first talk together and predict how all of these words connected to the idea of a first love letter. Okay. So they did all their prediction. They sort of prepared for the first listening of the video I had found. And then I played for them this video, My First Love Letter, with a famous actor. And who can type in first which country this actor is from? It's kind of funny how this nationality keeps coming up again and again for me, because it's the one I struggle with. Yep, France. So we did our normal listening lesson, and I just used a French speaker of English instead of a British speaker of English or an American speaker of English. And so the students got exposed to sort of other patterns of English that they might hear. We didn't talk at all about how he was from France, and my teenagers actually did an excellent job with sort of understanding the French accent of English. I think our teenage students are so globalized already that they're going to be very open to this a lot. Another thing that you can do to sort of make this interesting, to make it sort of more relevant to students, to maybe sell it to them a little bit, is to make it interactive. Because the whole point of adding sort of diverse accents into the English classroom is because it's realistic. Okay, so here's one way that you can make it interactive, sort of like listening / speaking, like a project you can do, really. Okay, if you're part of any English teaching Facebook group, you have probably seen a message like this. Have any of you guys seen sort of other English teachers around the world asking for pen pals for their students? I feel like I see it all the time in several of the English teaching Facebook groups I'm part of. So again, this one's from France, of course. So an English teacher in France is looking for pen pals. I've seen English teachers in Morocco looking for pen pals. English teachers in Costa Rica looking for pen pals. So you can do this, like it's nice to have sort of this genuine communication happening, especially for our younger students. Like I think that's really, really motivating for students. But what if we take the pen pal idea, which is maybe a little bit old-fashioned at this point, and sort of make it more 21st century? And instead of doing written communication, we do spoken communication. So you can do this with, I originally thought of using this with WhatsApp, but sometimes that's just, it requires exchanging personal information that, especially younger students aren't ready to exchange. So I found this website vukaroo.com. And what it lets you do is it lets you record your voice and send it to somebody else in a totally anonymous way. So you can partner up with a teacher from, I don't know, Argentina, for example, and you can have your students sort of record short introductions about themselves. You can have them sort of talk about what life is like in Ukraine and the quarantine. This is actually a great time to sort of promote this sort of digital communication, especially with other teens around the world who are probably bored at home, stuck with their parents and their families. So you can sort of have students record something, and then they can save it and they share the link. And you as the teacher can collect all of the links from your students, and you can send them directly to the other teacher of English, so that there's no personal information being exchanged from the students. And then you can have your colleague in Argentina or Japan or wherever can have their students listen and actually respond and talk about what their lives are like, especially in the quarantine right now. So I really like this idea. It does take a little bit of sort of planning and sort of preparation and getting your students ready for it, because they might be shy at first. But this is such an excellent way to sort of use English in a real, authentic way to communicate with people from around the world. Like I said, that's really motivating for students. Our teen students, they learn English from playing video games. So that's just finding these ways to really engage them and expose them to diverse accents is a really, really cool thing. And I think that they'll really sort of remember that for a long time. Something else that you can do in order to sort of make this part of your classroom is to make it routine. So right now, the routine is we use British English in the classroom. All the listening texts in the course book are British English. Maybe we'll get an American accent, okay? But it's not that much of a challenge for students. But what if instead we decided to make listening to diverse accents a routine part of our classroom? One way you can do this is actually to set it for homework. This is an activity that is a little bit more focused on the different characteristics of different aspects. In the activities I presented before, some of them are kind of subtle. You may, as a teacher, not want to focus on the different features of Ethiopian English or the different features of, Japanese English. When you have sort of the oral pen pals, that sort of understanding is going to take place in a very natural way. This activity I'm about to introduce to you is really trying to open students' awareness of different accents of English. So I found this activity on a website called TEFL Equity Advocates and Academy, and it's all about native speaker and non-native speaker equality in the English teaching industry. It's a really, really useful website. I really appreciate it as an American teacher of English. But this is a homework activity that a German teacher of English wrote about. And actually, this is going to be in a link. We're going to send an email to you guys with all the links of the different websites I'm talking about today. So you'll have this link as well, and you can go sort of read her whole post about how she incorporates this into her lessons, what she does with students, and you can download this page yourself. So what she does is she gives her students regular listening journal homework. And what's cool about it is the students choose the video. So maybe they sort of agree on maybe a topic, or maybe they agree on the length of video. She probably doesn't want to have to watch 15-minute long videos either. So they sort of agree on some basic ground rules. But the students go home, they go on YouTube. They're already on YouTube, let's be honest. Our primary, our secondary school students, they're on YouTube all the time. They choose a video to watch. And they do some critical thinking work as well with this activity. They have to explain why they chose this video in English. Sort of justification is something that my students struggle with. Why did you choose this? I liked it. Okay. So first they have to do some other processing skills as well. Then they talk about, and they write about like what the video is about. So who was speaking, what was the topic, what was the material covered in the video. So then you have sort of your general listening skills development, okay? And then this is where she sort of brings the focus to diversity of accents. Then she asks, on a scale of 1 to 10, how difficult was it to understand? And students have a chance to rank it, and then they have a chance to explain why. And this is useful in so many ways. First of all, it just really raises awareness for students. One of the things that I find a challenge in teaching diverse accents is that we can't expose our students to all of the accents they're to hear in their life. But what we can do is train them to figure out what they don't understand and how they can understand better. So what you're doing is you're sort of developing learner autonomy when they get into these difficult situations, okay? So if you teach them, for example, that Japanese speakers have trouble with the L and the R sound, then maybe when they meet like a speaker from China or a speaker from Thailand who also struggles with some of the English sounds, they'll be like, ah, I remember that Japanese speakers have a problem with this. Maybe that's also why I'm confused now. So it's about sort of awareness raising and learning to communicate better, okay, even if they're in a totally new situation. So this is a page from a German teacher of English, her sort of routine homework that she does. And like I said, this link will be sent to you guys at the end of the webinar and sort of the follow-up email we send you. So you'll have access to this. And this sort of just trains learners. All right, so they watched a video and there were, 3 guys from the Philippines talking about football, sports in the Philippines, okay? Then the learners get to sort of rate how difficult was it to understand and why. And this is something I do just verbally a lot of times with my students when I do diverse accents, okay? Sometimes I won't tell them that where the speakers are from, but if we watch a video, with like a BBC video, I'll be like, all right, how difficult do you think that was to understand? Why? It's just a little bit of sort of critical thinking skills development that you can do with your students. And like I said, this is great because it's homework. You don't have to worry about this so much in class. But afterwards, when you guys go over the homework, when you do some feedback, you as a teacher are starting to collect a lot of ideas on what your students need. So you don't have to come in as an expert on all these different accents of English. You get to look at what your students are having problems with, and then, if you feel they need it, you can go back, prepare some stuff, and present it to them in class and do some work with it in class. So it's quite sort of a sneaky way as a teacher to figure out what your students need, make them do a little bit of work first, but then you come and you are ready to give them feedback on some other ways that they can develop. Okay, so we're sort of moving through the activities and sort of like not really focusing on the accents, just including more diverse accents into your lessons to really focusing on the accents and their different features and their different accents. So one of the things I have done with some of my students is the decoding work. We do this with American, British, native accents anyway. We talk about connected speech. We do these sort of like bottom-up listening strategies so that they can focus on words and they focus on word stress. So you might actually want to do some decoding work in your classes with diverse accents. So why do you think you might need to do this? If you could put in the chat box, why might some people, some of our students, need specific training to understand different non-native accents of English? Because like I said, I've done it before with some of my students. We actually look at the different sounds that someone might make. Any ideas on why you might want to include decoding work for non-native speakers of English? Because it's pretty unusual. Okay, yeah, it's easier to read than hear, so you can sort of help them understand what they're hearing by looking at the transcript and sort of making connections that way. Okay, yeah, by doing some decoding work, they sort of relieve some pressure on the student to understand everything afterwards. Okay, it's very motivating. Yeah, I think that students sort of like the puzzle idea and they try harder as well. Good, yep, and if they have to communicate in a specific environment. Exactly. So like I said, when I learned that my student in Tbilisi, Miriam, the eye surgeon, I learned that she had to go to India for this medical conference. We had never, ever listened to any Indian speakers of English before. But as soon as I knew that, I was looking for videos from Indian speakers of English. I was looking for medical presentations from Indian speakers of English. And it was a challenge for me. It was interesting for me as a teacher, but it was so useful and relevant to her. Okay, so let's look at some decoding work that you could do in your classes. And again, it really depends on what your student needs, right? So with Miriam, she was going to India and she was leaving in like 3 weeks. So we had to focus, and we had to focus really, really hard. But for other students who maybe don't have such a specific need, you sort of can do some general, some easy, some quick decoding work to, again, raise their awareness. I'm currently teaching business English at London School of English, and we are using Business Partner. I see some of you have used it. Someone's saying it was a great book. I also really like it. This is my first year teaching with it, and it was quite easy to teach from. And I'm going to show you some of the things that we do using Pearson's Business Partner and how we use it doing some decoding work. So one of the great things about Business Partner is that they have 2 lessons in each unit with a video. So the first lesson of the unit has a BBC video. So we have an authentic video taken from the BBC, using lots of different people, doing real interviews. So it's really great. I like that one a lot. Different topics. And then we also have, in the third unit, a third lesson of each unit, we have a video about a multinational company, and it's written. So the people who wrote Business Partner wrote this video story, and it extends through the whole book. So all these different characters come in at different times, and they come from different countries. So for example, usually the main guy is Matt in the UK. So every unit, we have a video about Matt. And Matt has to interact with these different coworkers from different countries. And he always has a communication problem with them. So it's often like a work communication problem, but it also has to do with cultural awareness. So in one of the videos, he had to talk to Paula from Mexico because she was kind of behind on her project, and a previous manager said she was difficult to work with. In one of the videos, Matt had to talk to Stephanie from Germany, and he was a little bit nervous about their sort of different approaches to work, very sort of professional or more personal. Matt also had to talk to Kenji from Japan at one point about sort of problems that they were having on that project, and also Dan from the USA, again, sort of difficulties there. There are sort of cultural differences between how we do business in the US and how we do business in the UK. So this is a great opportunity for my students to hear different accents from around the world. And it is a scripted video, so it's not authentic. But again, like I said, it's such an excellent opportunity. Every unit, they meet new people from around the world and get exposure to their accents. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to show you guys the decoding work that I did with my students pretty early on in our course. This was unit 2. So I was pretty new to my students were pretty new to me, but we were watching this video about Bulgaria. It's a real BBC interview with Bulgaria, and they interview 2 people who work at this company. One of them is an Italian guy, and one of them is a French guy. So it was a chance for my students to be exposed to both the French accent of English and the Italian accent of English. And I'm going to show you guys a very, very small clip with the French speaker, and see if you can sort of see if you can hear some different characteristics of French speakers of English, and how they're different than sort of American speakers of English or British speakers of English. So let's watch this video. See if you can hear the differences in French speakers of English.
To pave the way for growth, we needed to speak to a broader and aspirational base of clients, which probably with jewelry would come much, much later. And so we have added products at a much lower price point as you would ever dream for a piece of jewelry.
Okay, it was a very short clip of them talking about their business. But did you hear any of the sort of features of French speakers of English? His English is very easy to understand, but maybe you heard sort of the different stress patterns. Yes, the R pronunciation, the French speakers, they do some interesting things with their R. Exactly the pronunciation of jewelry to jewelry. It's very different, even though he has sort of a very understandable accent. You guys can still hear how it's different, and you can sort of heighten your students' awareness of that. So what I normally do with students is that if we have one of these BBC videos with diverse accents, we sort of do all the general pre-viewing work. We do the gist task. And again, I don't normally tell them if there's going to be speakers, like non-native speakers of English. And then what will happen before we do the detail task, then we might do some very, very quick decoding work. And in this case, it takes less than 5 minutes. A lot of times, I'll sort of get their ideas first about if it was difficult for them to understand, what they found difficult to understand. And then what I do is I just kind of throw some things up there that I think are important for them to know. So after I get some of their ideas as listeners, then I'm like, okay, here are some things that you should know about French speakers. And maximum, I'll put up 3 things. Because again, I'm not teaching the students how to speak with a French accent. They don't need to know everything, but I'm thinking about what is important for this particular task. So for this task, they need to know that French speakers have different stress patterns. They needed to know that the French speakers actually have one sound for and oo. And this was relevant for this video because he actually says the word pool. They talk about hotels, and he says the word pool, and but he says it as a French person would say it. So my learners could immediately make the connection and be like, yes, I hear exactly what Amy was telling us. And French speakers also have difficulty with other vowel sounds too. So it just sort of like raises awareness among students. And with Italian speakers, they also have different stress and rhythm. There's other things as well with Italian speakers that can make it difficult to understand. They also have some variations with their vowel sounds, so they struggle a little bit with with live would be pronounced leave. Okay. Something interesting is there are no diphthongs in Italian, so they kind of pronounce each vowel sound individually. This you just kind of do within 5 minutes. Again, it's not something that you're teaching them how to say. You're teaching them to understand it, and you're teaching what's relevant to the task that they're doing. So you're not teaching them all of the different characteristics of Italian and French speakers. Like I didn't talk about the H, how it disappears sometimes. You get to think about what they can know, because again, it's part of just training as well, training them to be aware of the differences they're going to hear. Okay. So those were a couple of activity ideas for you guys. Again, they range from sort of just using diverse text to actually focusing on how accents are different. So I'm sure the big question now is where to find some materials. And I'm happy to share with you guys some different materials that you can use in your classrooms. Of course, the easiest thing is published materials. So here at Internal, at our Pearson products, we offer a lot of different materials that have video resources in them, which include diversity of accents as well. You guys are probably familiar with some of these. Maybe you guys are teaching with some of these right now. I know Wider World is really useful for this. And again, like I said, you can start this at a very, very young age. So you have those materials, and those are for your primary kids. Also, we have SpeakOut, which is for secondary and adult. That's what we use them for in our London School of English. We use SpeakOut for secondary and adult. And like I showed you before, the Ethiopian shoe company, every unit has a DVD lesson, and BBC, they go around the world. So you have a chance to sort of include more authentic texts in your lesson. And like we said already, business partner, we've got lots of different business partner books, and I can say that they're excellent, having taught from them now for a couple of months. If you'd like to know more about our books, we're doing a promotion starting the 12th of May, and we'll be sort of looking at a lot of our different books that we're offering this year. We're doing tons of webinars this spring, guys, like so many, and we really hope that you'll join us for all of them. And if you join, you can also get a promo code for a discount. So if you see some books that you like, you can get a discount on them. So you can find a lot of things from published materials, but I'm going to show you too, because some of us can't just use whatever we want. Some of us have to follow specific curriculum. Other places where you can find diverse accents. TED Talks. How many of you use TED Talks in your classrooms already? Because I know they're pretty popular with Ukrainian teachers. And I really like using them myself in classes when I can. Yep, I see some plus marks. Okay. Some people not so much, but you might find it an interesting thing to look into. TED Talks are great for a lot of reasons. You have experts from around the world. The videos are different lengths, different topics. And I really like using TED Talks because, again, it's real people. And that's really important. I think it's also very inspiring for students, especially like younger students and teenage students, secondary students, to see somebody whose English maybe isn't the sort of standard British or American English giving a talk at a very well-respected organization. So TED Talks are great to incorporate just as sort of listening materials. I'm going to show you some other things that you might not know. This is a website called My English Voice. And it's a very interesting website that was created by an English teacher, and it was created kind of as self-study for students. But you as an English teacher can go in and use the videos she provides. She has some worksheets as well. And it's, again, very much focused on sort of developing listening skills with some focus on understanding diverse accents. So this lesson was about a group of Filipino students who created a new app for the future. So that was like the context of the lesson. And there was a video to go with it and a worksheet that you can use with some awareness of Filipino English. But then she also has a really excellent YouTube channel. And the reason why I wanted to show this separate from the website is because she has these videos where she talks about the different aspects and different features of different accents in English. So you can learn a little bit, because like I'm no expert on Filipino English, so I would have to do some research. So it's really nice to have a video of someone explaining it to me. But she also has playlists that include not just her videos that she's created, but other authentic materials that you can use in your classroom. So you see there's like a video from Chanel, for example, or there's a video about another like fashion designer. So these are totally authentic, not created for like the English classroom. They're real videos, but they just give you a chance to find some more diverse accents. I really like this website as well. This is lo.org. This is a website created to develop listening skills for English learners. And there are all different levels there. So you can start with like, your beginners all the way up to sort of advanced level. I actually use this website a lot when I was developing my Delta Module 3 materials. It's very, very useful. These are mostly natural conversations. I think they might be like a little bit scripted or a little bit like they sort of agreed on what they were going to talk about, but they didn't write out every single thing they were going to say. So these are pretty natural conversations. And as you can see, they have the nationalities of the speakers. So you have Hannah from Japan and somebody from the US as well, having a conversation. In general, I found most of the non-native speakers here are very clear and very easy to understand. But it does give you a chance, like I said, just to include more diversity in your classroom. And like because this is the website that was designed for English learners, they also have some vocabulary activities on there. They have the transcripts. So it's really, really useful and easy to use if you're an English teacher, if you want to like create some of your own materials, or if you would like to have some materials already created for you. So that's a really useful website. Oh, also just going into YouTube and just Googling like English with a accent. As you can see, I chose my favorite one, again, French. And it comes up with this video where the Parisians try to speak English. And it was like this, it was some sort of like French YouTube channel. They went around the streets of Paris and they interviewed people on the street and they asked them about how their English skills, how did they like speaking English, did they communicate well? And then they have like the subtitles, the transcript of what the Parisians are actually saying and how it sounds different than what a British person or an American person would say. So they actually sort of focus on the unique features of French English. So this is a really cool kind of thing to do. Just go on YouTube, English with an accent. And you might have to scroll a little bit through, but you can find some really cool resources. So just a summary really quickly, where you can find diverse accents. YouTube, great resource. Published materials like we talked about, our Pearson products, Wider World, Speak Out, Business Partner, listening websites, interviews with famous people, very useful. Instagrammers, YouTubers, vloggers, ask your students who they follow on Instagram or YouTube or TikTok, and maybe you'll find some ideas that way. Podcasts are very useful as well, TED Talks, and that website, My English Voice. And like I said, the specific websites that I mentioned in this webinar will be included in an email to you guys after this is over. So you'll get sort of links to all these different places. Okay, so just kind of to wrap up, because we're almost out of time here, what I think, and hopefully maybe what you agree with me now, is that we need diverse accents in our classes now more than ever. Your students are going to be talking to not British people, not American people, but people from China or Japan or Mongolia or South Africa or Morocco or Turkey or wherever. So they need to be exposed to sort of like international Englishes. And you can include them in a variety of ways. It doesn't have to be like you're focusing so much on the different features of Filipino English. Just sort of by including more diverse texts, you will make your classroom more of a 21st century classroom. And there are plenty of materials out there, from published course books to online platforms and authentic sources. If you want to include it in your class, you can include it in your class. So do not be nervous that you can't find these accents out there. There's 1.5 billion speakers of English, so they're out there, I promise. So that's it for me, guys. Thank you so much for joining. Again, you'll be getting your certificates in your email in like about a week. And if you don't see it, check your spam box. We hope you guys join us for more webinars. We're doing lots and lots of them. If you have someone who you think would enjoy this webinar, I'm giving it again on Wednesday, so you can share it with your colleagues. It's a little bit of a controversial one, so maybe you'd like to get their opinion on it as well. But thank you guys so much for attending. Please join us for all our other webinars coming up. Like I said, we're doing lots of promotions. We're going to be looking at our books and how you can use them to the best of your ability in the best way in your classrooms, thinking about next year when we are hopefully back in the classrooms. So please join us for these webinars. They are free to attend. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for coming. If you have any questions, you can type them into the chat box, and I have a few minutes. I can answer them. Your certificates will be coming via email, so look out for that. Any final questions you guys have? I'm happy to sort of answer them for you. Thank you guys all for coming. Any final questions about using diverse accents in your classroom, or how to do it, where to find it? I'm happy to sort of share my ideas. Right. Well, guys, I never actually lived in London. So, well, I've lived in the UK for a short time, but most of my life abroad actually has been in Ukraine. So I've been living in Ukraine for almost 3 years now, on and off. So it's been very nice to be here with you guys and such a professional group of teachers. don't know, but I don't quite understand that question. All right, can I speak with a British accent? No. All of my British coworkers look at me really funny when I speak with a British accent. You know, my American accent is too strong, maybe. All right, guys, thank you so much for attending. I hope to see you in the future at another internal education webinar. Diakayu, if you have any questions, the moderator will be staying for a few minutes to sort of answer any other questions you guys might have. All right. Thank you guys very much. Have a great day.